All right. I would just like to welcome everybody in attendance today for today's webinar. My name is Tom. I'm going to be your host today. I'm with Bullpen, and as you can see from the first slide in front of you, there's a quick snapshot about what we do. A quick note on that is what we do at Bullpen is we are the #1 place if you're looking to hire a vetted and seasoned commercial real estate analyst. Whether you're looking for expertise in underwriting, asset management, or capital markets, we can help match you with the best analyst for your job. You can find out more about us and get in contact with us at bullpenre.com. Next, we would like to introduce our co-sponsor, and that is Stealth Realty Advisors LLC, which is a member of the TICI group of companies, which is a national brokerage firm with a menu of services which include capital markets, acquisitions, dispositions, and tenant representation to corporate and institutional clients. Stealth is also a strategic partner of both Bullpen and 10X Commercial. Now, the main topic for today is going to be presented by David Levi, who is a director with the company 10X, and he will be giving us a walkthrough of the incredible value real estate investors and professionals can find from 10X. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, David, and as soon as we get it switched over to you, please just introduce yourself. Just take a moment to introduce yourself.
Thank you. So I appreciate everyone carving out some time today. A little bit about me and my background. I've been in the commercial real estate sphere for roughly 15 years. I started my career out in securitization. I worked for GMAC Commercial Mortgage. After that, I worked for a family office, and then not too long after that, I went to BlackRock. After my experience working for large institutions and 10,000 plus organizations, I think sometimes it takes a little bit of time to realize what you as a professional what motivates you and what you're completely passionate about. Real estate and technology has been just that. So 10X has been my home for the last 4 years. We've been doing phenomenal things. Real estate is probably the last, if not one of the last industries to adopt technology. I think we have a lot of, folks who have been doing the same things for a very long time. And what we were trying to do was, reconfigure the market. And I think what I'll talk about today and what you'll learn about today is going to be a little bit of a non-traditional approach, but it covers a lot of the same traditional processes you see during a real estate transaction. But what I can say is that 10X has, they're basically the #1 real estate technology firm in the industry. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type them in. And if I don't cover it during the presentation, I can answer it when we have some time for Q&A. So with that, let's get started. So what is 10X? So 10X is a platform for buyers, sellers, and brokers to transact a commercial real estate transaction. So, I think there's a couple of different lenses that you can view what we do. From the sell side, which we'll probably cover more of today. What you gain with 10X versus the traditional approach is you have the ability to get a full marketing campaign. You tap into our investor and buyer database, which encompasses over 400,000 qualified buyers from across the country. You get control. What does that mean? So control, you get to fully understand who these interested buyers are, documents that they're reviewing that you are putting on the deal room. You get to see how often they're viewing it. You get to see when they're downloading it. You get to see when they're viewing your transaction. All of these are important data points to understand who's interested and who is truly going to be your best buyer prospect. You get efficiency. Efficiency means that there is a standardized process to what we do. There's a time certain deadline that we have our transaction process where it ends. We have a marketing campaign and a timeline, which I'll run through, and everyone is bound by the same rules and the same terms. And last but not least, you have certainty. I think the number one thing that I hear from my sellers today, and my sellers involve REITs, they involve banks, they involve private sellers, they involve brokers. The one thing I hear from sellers is that they go into contract and after a due diligence period, they get retraded or they have a buyer that completely walks away. So what we try to do with our platform is take the guessing out of the equation, only allow real buyers to enter the equation, and only allow real buyers to bid who are vetted and who are completely showing us that they have the financial wherewithal to purchase their asset. So, from a statistical standpoint, I know stats can be boring sometimes, but these are probably the two statistics that we look at all the time. 72% of buyers, when they purchase on our platform, they are unknown to the listing broker prior to coming in. So we have a broker dedicated to every single asset because we are a national platform. We need a broker to do the same things they do on a traditional approach, which is call buyers, which is tour buyers through the facility, and maintain the relationship with their sellers. So what happens is we bring the sellers and the brokers the buyers, and ultimately the buyers make the market. 72% of these winning buyers are unknown to the listing broker when a deal comes to 10x, meaning we are the driving force behind finding that buyer. And the second stat is we have less than a 5% fallout or retrade. So basically, if a deal is sold on the platform, 95% of the time, it closes within the stated time frame. And this is just an overall view of our track record. I think through the 10 plus years of existence that, we've been selling commercial real estate. Now this is from Q1 2019, so we've grown a little bit, but we've sold over $22 billion in commercial real estate assets. 10 years ago, we were part of auction.com. We've recently split. If you take auction.com into consideration, we've sold over, I would say, $40 billion of real estate. So I think our breadth and depth and market knowledge, I think it speaks for itself here. Whether it's retail, office, multi, hotel, or industrial, I think, we are able to sell all the the major food groups. I think industrial, for instance, has come on within the last 2 to 3 years. I think 5 years ago, if you asked us our track record in industrial, I think it would have been we have sold the product, but I don't know if we have the buyer pool. I think whether or not in my opinion, we can sell an asset as long as there's a market for it. We find the buyers for every single asset and property that we bring onto the platform. So I just think our track record, speaks for itself, and you can see that through the multi-billion dollars that we've transacted. Now this is just a page that talks about our seller and our bidder activity for some of our institutional sales. So, institution like a REIT, they come to us, they have a property that they want to sell, I would say anything from, $1 million to $20 million. We have the ability to compete in. But, I think from a statistical standpoint, this slide is going to talk about more of our retail assets just because retail was, I think, the largest component of what we've sold. So we tried to hone in on some of the statistics that we had behind our retail assets. Now, what we found is when we load an institutional retail deal onto the platform, we get close to 2,000 web page views. We get 7 fully approved bidders. A fully approved bidder means that they have taken steps to register to bid for the asset. They have shown us proof of funds, they have signed a participation deposit, and they filled out a more or less a know your customer questionnaire. Only then are they fully approved to bid. But we average 7 fully approved bidder on these deals. 74 interested buyers, that I would say would equate to the number of CAs that get signed on a traditional retail deal. And we get 15 bids, close to 15 bids on every single retail deal. Now, what that means is those are real bids. Those are bids that the buyers are contractually obligated to fulfill. The seller is always protected by a non-disclosed price. So once that non-disclosed price is hit or exceeded, the seller is under no obligation to sell. But the bids that come in are all real and binding bids from fully approved bidders. Now, this is just a list of companies that have worked with us, that have sold with us. Whether you're a Colony Capital, a Blackstone, an Oaktree, we work with the largest institutions. We worked with the largest banks in the entire country. I think one of the largest misconceptions about 10X and what we do is that we are a distressed platform. Now, I would say the genesis of our business was around distressed real estate. So, during the 08-09 crisis, obviously, it was a different time where there was a lot of distressed product out there. I would say, fast forwarding 12 years later, obviously, the distressed market is not that robust today. Obviously, there is distressed product out there, but it's few and far from what we saw during the 08-09 crisis. So we have adapted our business. We have pivoted our business where we are now, I would say coming up on 8 years, we are selling non-distressed assets, real estate that is of good quality, real estate that is stable or of value add, and, real estate that is not distressed. I think we can sell an asset that is saleable. People ask me sometimes, what's the type of product that you can sell on the platform? Well, I always say, well, listen, if you've gone through your traditional approach, you're unable to drum up interest, offers, any qualified buyers. I mean, yes, the platform might be able to drum that up, and we have done that. But sometimes I think you have to look at what you're selling, whether it's mispricing, whether it's what information is being flowed to your buyer pool, or the due diligence that's being provided. A lot of things go into the selling of a real estate asset. So I would just say, to sum up, we work with the largest companies in the country who own real estate, and we work with some of the private sellers who own 1 to 5 assets. So the secret sauce is really going to be in our buyer pool. And I think if you look at the landscape and the trajectory of who's buying real estate, in my opinion, anyone can go to a corporate website and find the acquisitions director for a large company. It's fairly easy to go to a corporate website and to look at who is making the decisions on acquisitions. Now, what's not easy is to find the @Gmail or @Yahoo buyers. These are the individuals who are unknown to the market. They're unknown to a lot of the brokerage communities, and those are the folks who are actually selling the most on buying the most on our platform. These are individuals who do not have brokerage relationships. They do not have access to the same inventory. And I would say sometimes, you sometimes want to float deals to certain buyers for certain reasons. We're buyer agnostic, so we want to give every buyer equal playing field and the same opportunities to purchase an asset as a large institution. So, I would say 50% plus of the buyer database that we have in the 10X I would say data room is going to be private investors. Sub 50, you're now talking about larger known entities. Now, I talk a lot about private investors, but we still have institutions who do purchase on our site. But I would say for the most part, a lot of the Gmail, Yahoo accounts are the folks who are purchasing the most on the 10X site, and these are the people who are somewhat fragmented in the market. They're unknown, and these are the ones who we hone in on most when selling the asset. In terms of marketing, what we offer is it's a free online tool. We're completely success-based. So anyone bringing an asset to our platform, unless we sell that asset successfully and close successfully, we do not earn a penny. So when we talk about how are we expanding your marketing reach, we're obviously we're capturing the buyers in our data. We are building out a dedicated property website for your property. We go ahead and take professional photographs. That's on our dime. We send out on your behalf targeted emails. We also send out for certain price points direct mail or snail mail. I think most of the world has gone digital. I think sometimes when you do get a direct mail, you kind of stand out today because it's so expensive to send out direct mail. We do print and digital advertising. We've been known to advertise in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times for certain assets, and we obviously advertise in other digital sites that are, that we pay for, frankly. And then we have one-to-one outreach. I think we have access into who's signing confidentiality agreements. We give you, the seller, access to that. We give the broker who's on the deal access to it because we want them to reach out to the buyers and to really give them, a handheld approach into the asset, into how, the buying on the online platform works, and some of these folks want to go see the property too. So they're going to go ahead and do a property tour, and the broker is going to go ahead and, facilitate that property tour. But I think from the seller benefit, you're clearly maximizing your exposure. You're getting significant cost savings, whether you're a seller or a broker, by not having to front the cost for a lot of these marketing activities that you might pay for today, as we're footing the bill for it. And timing. I think like what we do helps you potentially sell an asset in maybe, I would say, 75 to 90 days. I think that's unheard of in the industry. From the time you start marketing to the time you actually close, selling an asset in 75 days is fantastic. And, that's our goal, to, minimize time, because we know that time is money for a lot of sellers and also buyers. And then another stat that I want to mention to you is that, 51% of our buyers are out of state to the property of where it's located. So if you're selling a property in Massachusetts, 50% of the time that buyer is coming from outside the state. I think the local buyers, we obviously want to make sure they're involved, but through our data, we find that it's the folks who don't have access to that local market that are for the majority of the time purchasing on our site. So it just, it lets some credence to, if you have a wider exposure and wider audience, even if they're not local or proximate to the property, they still want to purchase it. Moving on, how our marketing process works. We have data matching technology. So, in terms of a timeline, I think if you're trying to ascertain how we go about with our process, once we go live, meaning once the property is up and running, we've taken pictures, we've built out the property display page, i.e. the website, we're ready to go. We market for 45 days. Bidders have an opportunity to look at the asset and access the data room and, do all their diligence for 45 days. I think prior to going live, we do a lot of the matching. We want to make sure that we are marketing during the marketing process to the right buyers. So we have a dedicated team who identifies interested buyers within our database. While we have a 400,000 plus buyer database, not all of them are going to be interested in the same property. If you're a healthcare oriented buyer, you don't want to see a retail asset. So we want to make sure we're honing in on the right buyers, because we don't want to give our buyers fatigue and get another unnecessary email. So that's a lot of what we do. We want to make sure the right buyers are getting the asset. And then we match, we let the algorithms do the talking. Our proprietary algorithm matches these potential buyers, and they get emails and calls about your property. Then we move on to the pursuing, which is marketing it, and then we obviously convert them. So basically, I think this talks about the targeting matching that I mentioned before. How do we get to the right people? So we have engineers who sit in a San Mateo office. which is out in California, obviously, and they're behind the scenes doing a lot of this, and we're constantly getting new buyers into our site, into our data, and we're trying to hone in on the right people when the right assets come to the platform. Back to timeline, for someone who wants to sell the asset, it basically takes about, I would say, onboarding, which is getting information on the property, collecting due diligence, taking pictures. It's roughly 2 to 3 weeks, so anywhere from 14 to 20 days. Once the asset is started to be marketing, it takes 45 days for us to complete marketing. We then go into a 2-day online bidding process. If the seller's non-disclosed price is hit or exceeded, we have a sale. If it's not, then obviously the seller's under no obligation to sell with us, and then the property closes 30 days from there. I think the keys here is that you have certainty to know that by a certain date you will have achieved or not achieved your floor price. Everyone plays by the same rules, so sellers ultimately accepting the highest bid that that meets or exceeds their floor price, and you close escrow 30 days later, more or less of the time. So, achieving the certainty of close is what most of our, if not all of our sellers are looking for. Certainty of close is probably the number one pain point, like I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, that sellers are trying to avoid, and our technology is what goes ahead and does that. We're a national platform, as I mentioned earlier on. We play in all segments of the market. As you can see, the Smile states are obviously, or the coastal states, we obviously have the most amount of volume that comes there, but, I think we play in all the primary markets, secondary and tertiary. Obviously, for certain areas we haven't transacted, we'll be honest with you and let you know whether or not we can make a market. We do a full upfront due diligence as to whether or not we feel confident that we can make a market with your asset. If you just give us the basic information, and we look at our past history and past track record and are upfront with you. We never want to bring on an asset that we know upfront that we wouldn't be able to sell. So, and I think our clients appreciate the honesty that we give to them. And sometimes we get clients who, provide us deals at certain price points, and we're honest back with them saying, we like the asset, but I don't know if we can achieve the targeted pricing that you need to hit. So again, I think it all lends to the transparency that we're trying to create, not only for the buyer, but for the seller. And, this is the end of my presentation is just going to talk about 2 case studies. I'll hone in on a couple of assets that we've sold just to, give you a perspective as to what it looks like. So this was a large office building in Jacksonville, Florida, that we sold. Obviously, a higher price point of $24.5 million. The things that I want to mention, it was an institution who sold it. It was a private buyer who bought it. We had a broker in Transwestern who was the broker on the deal. The seller's reserve price was, well, it's not included here. We achieved 136% of the seller's reserve price, meaning from the seller's floor price, it went up 36%. I think that's telling. Like whether or not the seller employed a strategy where he had a low reserve, where he wanted bidders to then see that the deal was going to sell, to we just had a tremendous amount of activity. I think if we're all honest with where we need to be, we can make a market past your floor price. We're not just getting your floor price, we're exceeding it, which is ultimately what we want to do. And we also want to have certainty of that closing. We were able to close the asset in 102 days from when we started bringing on the asset. We had 15 approved bidders and 65 bids, and 328 CAs were signed. So, not all assets look like this, but this is a clear example of success that's achieved on the platform. And another asset that I want to mention is a retail asset that we sold in Pennsylvania, $5 million here. We achieved just the reserve price or the floor price that the seller was, trying to maintain. It took close to 80 days from when it was brought to us to market and close the process. We had 4 approved bidders and 8 bids that came in through this process. Again, I would say, 157 CAs signed. That's pretty good in my book, which converted into these 4 approved bidders who wanted to purchase the asset. Uniontown, not a primary market per se, but it just lends credence to the fact that we can sell assets in secondary and tertiary markets. So that concludes my section. I apologize if I talk fast. That's a little bit of my New York mentality. I'm going to hand it over, and if anyone has questions, please feel free to send those questions in your Q&A box, and I'll be happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right here.
All right. Actually, David, if you want, you can leave up your contact page.
Okay.
So that way people can reach out to you if they will, and then I'll jump in. We'll jump into the Q&A now. I'll just read these. I'll read these to you. All right, the first question we have, David, is what is the approximate timeline to go through an auction process?
Yeah, so ultimately when someone comes to us saying they want to bring an asset to the platform, we evaluate the deal and come back to you with our opinion, and or suggestions. So from the time someone comes to us to the point in time they say they're ready to go, once they're ready to go, it takes approximately 14 to 20 days to get the asset live on the platform. In those 14 to 20 days, we're collecting due diligence for the deal room. We are going out and taking photographs. Again, all on our dime. We're ordering third-party reports. That's another thing I want to mention. We order a property conditioning assessment and an environmental phase 1 report. Again, on our dime for the asset. So those things are ordered and then loaded once we receive them. And then once we have the property live on the platform, it takes 45 days for marketing, and then we go into a 2-day bidding process. Only registered bidders can bid at that time. And then once that floor price is met or exceeded, we close 30 days later. So I would say if you provide me all the information I need, the 14 to 20 days would be much less. But in general, you're looking at around 75 to 90 days in aggregate from the time you say, I'm ready to go, to the time the property closes.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And we have 2 more questions. The first is, what are the transaction costs?
That's a very good question. So our fee is, number one, paid by the buyer. So we have 2 ways to transact. The first is through an online auction, and the second is more or less through our transactional approach, which replicates more of the traditional model. I stayed away from that for the presentation just because I didn't want to confuse folks. But if there is further questions about that, I can get into it. But on the auction approach, the buyer pays us a 5% buyer fee, again, it's a fee that we've been charging buyers for 10 years. We have repeat buyers, and it doesn't get in the way of having buyers submit bids and closing in on deals. But again, our fee is paid by the buyer, not the seller, and it doesn't get in the way of the brokerage fee.
Okay, thank you, David. And then the final question we have is, how often is the investor database updated? How current is it?
Every day. So it's updated every single day. We for every deal that we get, we're scrubbing other sources of data and bringing them to our online portal. So, what we're trying to do is capture buyer behavior on our platform and then use it to, pursue the right buyers for future deals. So I would say, I think I've mentioned the 400,000 number probably for the last 6 months. I have to imagine the buyer database has gone up from there. But, again, I think we get new buyers to our database every single day. I'm fairly obsessed with seeing who's looking at deals and where they're coming from. And, whether it's a large institution or a private seller or the guy next door, you're very surprised sometimes as to like who is like looking at the information and who's becoming interested. And that's really the neat part of the process of what we do.
Excellent. Well, with that, unless there's anything else you'd like to add, David, that's the close of our webinar today. We'd just like to thank you, David, and our sponsors and co-sponsors and everyone who joined us. Please stay tuned for future webinar announcements and take care. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I appreciate it.